Reviewing Googling Strangers, an essay by John Green written inside the Anthropocene Reviewed. By not John Green. The Anthropocene Reviewed. Inside John Green's The Anthropocene Reviewed, Green composes around 42 essays regarding various, often mundane or unthought about aspects of his daily life, ranking them all out of 5 stars. Through this format, Green unintentionally argues about various views he holds on the aspects he goes over, and why he rates them so. This allows him to subconsciously create an argument which explains why he rates whatever aspect he's talking about out of 5 stars, and why it gets that rating. Introducing Googling Strangers. Green's 25th essay inside the Anthropocene Reviewed is written about his skill of, as he puts it, Googling strangers. This essay mostly focuses on a story he tells regarding his time as a student chaplain, specifically a night which drove him to end his religious studies, in order to frame his argument concerning the worth of Googling strangers. Throughout his essay, Green mixes several emotional and authority-based appeals using various strategies to further his message naturally. All of these we'll be going over today inside this presentation. The beginning, metaphorically. Side note, this is not a chronological analysis of the essay, it's simply referring to how Green chooses to format the beginning of his essay. Green begins his essay by starting at his childhood, using his experiences as a kid to frame his argument closer to the reader. This pathos appeal is seen throughout the first page of his essay, in which Green uses descriptive, grouping diction to connect his experiences as both a child and adult to that of the reader, allowing for his message to be effectively emphasized. Alongside this, he often belittles his own experiences, usually by highlighting his own awkwardness to connect to the reader. This prefacing the latter half of his essay allows for Green to not have to worry about connecting to his reader, growing his pathos appeal while also growing his credibility through his emotionality. So here are some examples of this. You might notice that he begins the entire essay with a "when I was a kid," which portrays the feeling that he's about to tell a story. He then goes later on to reference, as a child he felt he had no inborn gift, something that I feel many might feel when they're growing up. He also begins to state the awkwardness of his gift, stating, "Of course I know it's weird," and making a joke at the end of it, his paragraph stating, "Do you guys have a rivalry with hardwood floor people?" So using these appeals to the very fact that we are human and we have had shared emotions, Green already starts his essay by grouping us together. This therefore allows him to switch to other ideas without having to worry about his reader feeling left out or not understanding the experiences he's gone through. How Green portrays his story. For a majority of his essay, Green supports his message through the portrayal of a story from his time as a student chaplain. Through this support, he slowly builds a repertoire on the worth of his skill of Googling strangers. To format his support, Green breaks his story into different parts which exemplify different feelings he felt during the experience. This allows for a greater magnitude of emotional appeals by allowing the reader to fully understand what he has experienced, prefacing a greater shift to his message later in the essay. So here are some examples of this. A major thing you can use to see where he actually breaks to different aspects of his story is using these bars, as he uses these throughout every switch inside the story. So initially he starts talking about an objective retelling of what he was doing, specifically through "when I was 22 and working as a student chaplain at a children's hospital, I would spend 24 hours or on call once or twice a week." So this type of storytelling just gets us to know the setting in which he was inside. Next, he starts using this very descriptive language as the night progresses, as the child with a burn comes in. He starts saying how the anguish was overwhelming, the smell of the burns, the piercing screams that accompanied this little boy's heavy exhalation. So this portrays just how traumatic it was for Green to see that boy as he was going through the actual night himself. He then states later on that when the kid finally went upstairs to the ICU, he starts talking to the doctor, in which she says, "That kid's gonna die, and I know his last words. I know the last thing he'll ever say." He then uses shorthand diction to state, "I didn't ask her to tell me what it was, and she didn't volunteer." So throughout this, he actually portrays the emotions he was feeling at the time through subconsciously using descriptive words when needed, and then using short words when his brain would have been thinking of something else. It's seen inside the first and end of the story. How Green portrays his story, Part 2. By formatting the story to the feelings Green felt, he taps into the emotions of the reader and creates a pathos appeal, making his argument seem of more importance. It also allows for the reader to cast away their preemptive thoughts by turning their mind away from the idea of Googling strangers, something many might consider negative. This allows for the great switch Green makes at the end of his essay. So, about those switches. Green's switches are actually a humongous part of his rhetorical devices. In his essay, Green makes various sharp switches in both diction, formatting, and subject in order to amplify the importance of both the support and message he states afterwards. He does this throughout his essay, notably switching from his bunching introduction to the beginning of his story. He then uses it halfway through his story, switching to exemplify the story's emotional importance, then switching it back to short diction to conclude his essay by connecting the story to his argument. So here's some examples of that, 2 examples specifically. Again, you can see those bars. He starts this essay by talking about his own experiences Googling strangers, and then quickly switches to his story without stating much. You notice he says, I can't outright condemn the Googling of strangers, and then just jumps into his story. And then halfway into the story, I already told you of the emotional formatting. This is another use of this great switch. He actually switches from the sad and very, very hectic half part of his essay, of his story, in which he's talking about this child and what their parents are going to do, and then switches it to when he is inside the break room with the doctor. And in there, it's more somber tone, which again allows for a different emotional appeal via a different emotional feeling being held inside the reader's mind. So here's another example, and this is probably the greatest example. So he goes from telling the story and then starts again about the Googling strangers, and then starts explaining how he had never seen the kid for years and months, and then he had just wondered what happened to him. And then he starts using sharp diction, another quick switch, about how he is alive. He is growing up, finding his way in the world, documenting life that is more public than he probably realizes. He is alive. He likes John Green tractors and is a member of the Future Farmers of America, and he is alive. So he repeats the fact that he is alive and starts using this shorthand diction as a way to really push the fact that this kid is alive and push the very fact that he had emotion when he learned this kid was alive by Googling him, something he figured out through his skill. So in review, Green ends up rating the action of Googling strangers 4 out of 5 stars, giving such an important high score out of remembrance of the time in which Googling strangers was most important to him, being the story we just went over. By pulling the reader in with a personal, connecting, awkward recollection of Green's childhood, he prefaces the story which supports his major argument. Green then expertly portrays the story in different sections, appealing to the emotions of the reader by directly connecting them to his emotions at the time, and wraps his entire argumentative style together by using direct and quick switches throughout his essay, making his argument almost pop out of the pages like the turns in a roller coaster. So I'm actually going to rate Googling strangers now as he rated the actual skill of Googling strangers, in which I say it does give a lot of pathos-based argument, and it's very compelling for that, but at the same time, there's not many logic-based arguments and very little based on his credibility other than the credibility of emotion, in which, for this reason, I must give Googling strangers 3 out of 5 stars, which isn't good. It's not bad, but it isn't very good either. It's just for the fact that he should use different types of appeals to get to his further point more often. He does this throughout his book, and it's just something that you can see throughout the Anthropocene Reviewed, but it's still a good read, and I recommend it to anybody. So thank you for listening. It's been great, and thank you for watching this presentation. Have a great day.